Hi, folks. Welcome to episode 21, The Great Depression. I'm Dan Brady, as always,
I'm Johnny Smith, as usual.
and we got a great episode for you today. Johnny, how are you doing?
I'm doing all right, Dan. Best as can be described right now. I'm doing better than I should be. How about yourself?
Yeah, man, I'm doing all right. Just excited to be recording with all my new equipment. Um, hopefully it translates well for the podcast. I do, not to get extremely emotional, but I do want to state, folks, going right now on our Teespring store. Link will be in the episode description. All the January sales will go to Johnny's family. If you listened to the episode last week, his wonderful aunt, who was a great person, passed away from COVID-19, and of course, because deaths are never expected and nobody's ever financially prepared. Every sale from our store this month, the month of January, will go towards Johnny and his family to help get them out some of the debt that is caused by death.
Thank you very much for that, Dan. Rest in peace, Nan.
Rest in peace, Nan. All right. So today we are talking about the Great Depression. Now that we got all the adult stuff out of the way, we're talking about one of the most troubled periods from 1929 to 1939. A lot of people like to talk and say, oh, 2020 was the worst year ever. I wouldn't say the worst year ever. I'm pretty sure there's people that gathered in bread lines in 1929 who would beg to differ. But what is your knowledge on this?
The Great Depression, I guess the stock market crashed and people went in turmoil. It corrupted or bankrupted the economy. I was doing a little bit of research, and from what I understand, some of it was caused by I don't want to say necessarily predatory lending from banks,
Yes.
but like the way you could speculate, buy into the stock market was not necessarily backed by anything, and it just screwed people over. The way it was going up, people looked at these billionaires. There was a couple billionaires back then. Think about the money they had and how well they were doing, just spectating and doing what they did with their trades on the market. And they thought, well, the Dow Jones seems to steadily be growing up, and it how could we not make money? And then when it collapsed and the floor fell out, no one knew what to do.
So it's kind of like anything we ever really do on this podcast. It's just moments in history don't just happen. It always seems to be a perfect storm of events. You're correct. That is one of the reasons. There are several reasons that kind of combine into this perfect storm of fuckery for Americans. This didn't.
I'm going to be honest.
Go ahead.
I'm going to be honest. I rely on you for the bulk of the research. So many times with topics, I fall asleep during YouTube videos of what we're going to be talking about, and like some of it seeps in, some doesn't.
That's okay, because that's what I'm here for, Johnny. But like I was saying, like there's several factors that go into this, and just it was coming for a while, but of course Americans were like, oh, we're making money, we're dancing, the roaring 20s, everything's great, this isn't going to end. And then once you kind of we get Herbert Hoover in the office, who was a Republican, and his campaign was basically, we're going to end poverty for America. Of course, the opposite happens, but you just kind of get this ideology of like everything's going great, nothing can happen, even though there's been crashes before. Nothing to the degree of what happened in 1929.
Yes.
So, when we say the Great Depression, the start date is usually October 1929. But like I said, a lot of these issues and a lot of the contributing factors started before that. Like we're going to go all the way back to 1918 with the Treaty of Versailles, which brought an end to World War I. as the cause of World War One, millions were dead. Millions more were displaced because of the damage caused by the conflict. So they had to rebuild. The treaty that officially ended the war not only required Germany to accept all blame for starting the war, which that can be argued, and that will probably be a later dive, but was also obliged to assume the economic responsibility. They were expected to pay France and Great Britain over $30 billion in reparations. But
that crushed Germany. That crushed them.
Yeah, Germany was already completely bankrupt from the war, and they didn't have the means to pay such a staggering amount. France and Britain were unable to repay the United States for their support during the war. Calvin Coolidge, President of the United States from 1923 to 1929, refused to restructure any of the war debt, thereby keeping the European economy suppressed and ultimately unable to purchase from U.S. companies. So they were taking the demand away from overseas. So towards the end of the 1920s, American companies needed consumers anywhere they could get them. After the war, many people in the rush of new products, for instance, cars, they bought much of their goods on credit, and as personal debt rose, spending eventually decreased, because if you don't have money, you're not going to buy new stuff. So people are just taking stuff out on credit. Yeah.
That was one of the big issues that one of these documentaries really hit on. The buy now, pay later format really screwed people over. And everything was adding to that. Like they said, Henry Ford even introduced Model Ts as buy now, pay later.
Yes. So you have all these products coming up in the 1920s. And like I said, a lot of people are buying them on credit, and eventually people ran out of credit and couldn't buy anymore. So companies kept making this stuff. Like major industries such as textiles and steel were especially hard hit. One of the stalwarts of American business for the past 60 years, the railroad industry, experienced decline because of the rise of the automobiles. By 1929, close to half of American families had cars. Between 1925 and 1929, new housing construction also declined. One of the sectors that was hit harder than all the rest was agriculture, because at this time, America was still roughly 45% rural. That means 45% of Americans didn't have indoor plumbing and stuff like that. We were still very much a farming country. The 1929.
My mom was born in 1962, and she still talks about growing up having an outhouse.
Wow. The 1920s are often remembered as a time of great prosperity, but not for farming. During this time, the McNary-Haugen Bill was introduced and passed in Congress. It required the U.S. government to buy surplus crops from farmers to prevent them from realizing another loss. The government would in turn sell the crops on the world market through the market in Europe, but it wasn't as lucrative as it had been immediately following the war. So the government was taking these crops from struggling farmers, and they were paying full price for it, and then they were pushing it to Europe, but they were suffering an incredible loss on the price, because of course Europe is still financially unstable after World War I. So in order to recover the losses, taxes were raised in the United States, or would be raised. But Calvin Coolidge vetoed the measure twice, saying he was resisting the tyranny of bureaucratic regulation and control.
Let me stop you there. Calvin Coolidge was a Republican?
He was, I believe so.
Yeah. And it's just a fascinating way of thinking about, like, the government argues against itself. And weird. It's like, here, we did all this to screw you over, but we're also not going to change anything because that's tyranny from us that we're screwing you out of everything.
Right. you're going to see like a lot of the financial ideologies were a lot different back then. Like Herbert Hoover's administration didn't want debt or didn't want a national deficit, and a lot of ideology is a lot different back then than it is now. So,
although it reminds me of saying like, "Hey Dan, my right hand punched you in the face. My bad. My left hand's gonna caress you. I'm sorry. I didn't realize this was happening."
So, the New York Stock Exchange was founded in 1773. The buying and selling of stocks was not common practice in the United States, at least not among the middle class. There had been limited buying of bonds and commodities by the middle class after World War I. Investing in companies became much more common. Two methods of buying, however, were especially risky. First, speculating on stocks were quite common in investment circles during the 1920s. The second method was a bit worse, buying on margin. Buying on margin is the practice of using credit to secure the purchase. For instance, to buy an expensive stock, an investor needs, as an example, $100, but the investor only has $50, so they must secure the additional funds somehow, namely credit. So the buyer secures a loan for 50% of the price or 50% margin. This strategy works out great if the stock value rises. The investor can take their profit, pay off the loan, and pocket the rest. If the stock falls, however, the money isn't only lost, but the investor still needs to pay back the loan. If enough stocks fall in value at the same time, the investors who were trading on margin would be in a precarious position. In the late 1920s, American investors were buying as much as 75% on margin.
See, and that was like almost a get rich quick scheme. Like they were seeing how these big men were doing it, so they wanted to follow suit.
Yeah, and these predatory loans were just taking advantage of these people. So after the election in 1928 and the ascendancy to the presidency by Herbert Hoover in the spring of 1929, these warning signs weren't readily apparent or simply ignored and dismissed. The American economy had always been cyclical in nature. And even if the prosperity of the 1920s was coming to a close, it didn't mean that anything devastating was about to happen. Because we're even seeing it today. Stuff rises and falls. It's just, it goes in a circle.
That's part of it, man.
September and October in 1929 saw a great deal of volatility in the stock market. It was apparent that the market was in the process of a correction. On Thursday, October 24th, 1929, a day that would be called Black Thursday, over 12 million shares were dumped by investors, losing 2% of its value. The market rebounded on Friday, in large part thanks to investment banks buying stock to stimulate the market, but it wasn't enough. The market fell again on the following Monday, October 29th, Black Tuesday. The market moved over 16 million shares, causing a 12% loss of its total value, the largest single day loss in the history of the stock market. The stock market would continue to fall for the next 3 years. It would not reach its record high of September 1929 until 1954.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
So these people, they got out on the Thursday before with only a 2% loss if they would have stayed out, but I'm sure they reinvested once it recovered on Friday.
Right. And there's pictures and videos out there of just like millions, thousands and thousands and thousands of people just converging on the stock exchange. Like I couldn't imagine what it was like inside of there, like selling 12 million stocks. Like, can you imagine how much of like a WWE cage match that was?
I imagine it's rough, but like I've only seen it in like videos and film footage of what it's like. Crazy, but I don't understand it. I don't understand like who's taking orders. It just seems like a guy screaming with papers in their hands, sell, and buy. It's like, who's keeping track of all this shit?
Well, there's also videos, because now we're including all that in our podcast, but out of my personal taste, there are videos out there of people jumping out of buildings on Black Tuesday, and it's just like a lot of people were like, fuck. But one of the biggest causes of why the depression continued for so long is because a lot of people were like, well, this sucks, but it's going to come back. We do have to change some stuff in our financial outlook, but it's going to be okay. And it wasn't. It was far from okay.
That sounds a lot like today, Dan. That sounds an awful lot like today.
It's like Ving Rhames from Pulp Fiction. I am far from fucking okay, man.
Best impression I've seen Dan do, by the way.
Oh, yeah, man. That was perfect. Wait a minute. You told me I did a good impression of Charles Whitman's mother last week. Okay?
Yeah, you did, but your Ving Rhames takes the cake because your voice didn't change, but as soon as you said it, I just imagined this big hulking black dude.
Oh, thanks. The crash of the stock market caused a chain reaction throughout the financial sector of the United States. Shortly after the final sell-off of October 29th, 1929, bank customers wanted to become liquid, meaning they wanted to put all their cash under a mattress. The banks were unable.
I just want to say Ving Rhames is the Wish version of Michael Clark Duncan. I'll die on that fucking hill.
How dare you? Come on, man. Well, to be fair, you probably only seen one movie that Michael Clark Duncan was in, and you probably seen half a movie that Ving Rhames was in.
No, man, I love both of those guys as actors. Shout out to the movie Baby Boy. I love that goddamn movie. Come on, Jody. But Michael Clark Duncan is just the superior actor. I've seen a bunch of movies of Michael Clark Duncan. The Green Mile, the whole 9 yards. Come on, there's a bunch of movies with Michael Clark Duncan. He's a beast. What was it? He was in what? Daredevil. He was Ken at one point.
Yeah, it wasn't he
Michael Clark?
Yeah. So anyway, you know where Michael Clark Duncan?
No. And then Ving Rhames is just some dude named Animal fighting in fucking prison in all his goddamn movies. Get the fuck out of here. Michael Clark Duncan has reign.
Oh man. Oh.
Rest in peace, Michael Clark Duncan.
Oh, well, Ving Rhames is still alive, so he's the best by default. So the banks were unable to.
They call me sir. They call me sir. They Call Me Sir was a phenomenal movie about Sir Parker, the NFL player that came from nothing, and he was a coach in that movie. Get the fuck out of here. Let's get back to the crushing debt of 929.
The banks were. Thank you for allowing me to get back to my podcast. The banks were unable to provide funds for the amount of customers demanding their money. Banks were the main institutions helping investors buy on margin. When the market crashed, those lenders did not see a repayment on the loans, hence the shortage of cash available. So banks aren't treated like they are today. So once banks ran out of money, they were out. So it didn't matter if you had $1,200 in your bank account. If they didn't have that money to give you, you lost your fucking money.
That's where like being FDIC insured comes in.
Yes, sir. We will talk about that here in a little bit. The banks try to pay back their customers, sometimes a little as 20 cents to the dollar, but more often they simply couldn't pay. When a bank couldn't make its payments, it was forced to close, and all that was deposited was lost. So in 1929, about 70 banks closed. From October 29 until October 1930, over 700 banks were forced to close. By 1933, shortly before Herbert Hoover left the presidency, another 4,000 banks had closed.
So this may be off topic, Dan. What was Herbert Hoover's presidency looked like? What was his legacy after he left?
We're about to cover all that. It wasn't great. He was really viewed by the American people as not not just the cause, but as a guy who sat back and didn't do a fucking thing while everything was going on. Because, like I said,
Oh, wow.
he believed the worst was over. Businesses began to lay off workers as demand evaporated. Unemployment rose dramatically. At one point, it was like 25% of Americans were unemployed. President Hoover elicited a promise from major manufacturers not to continue the layoffs in order to help people return, but employers tried to comply with this, but eventually they could not honor the pledge. Like I said, by 1933, between 25 to 30% of Americans were out of work. As people lost their jobs or saw their wages drastically cut, the consequences were often devastating. In large urban areas that had grown significantly since the 1890s, public charitable organizations were just completely full of requests for assistance. Some were forced to close because of the high demands. Like the Catholic Church, they helped as much as they could, but their efforts to relieve the poor were just historically short term. They weren't meant to be a long-term fix. And a lot of times, all the best that churches could offer people were prayers. Income shrank and became non-existent.
Prayers.
Many were forced out of their homes for not meeting their mortgage payment, or more likely, in the case of the working class, were unable to pay their rent. So you have homelessness. And we will talk about there's a large transient homelessness population in America at this time, but many people lost their houses. Like, I'm going to guess you haven't seen this movie, but Cinderella Man with Russell Crowe. He plays a boxer in the 1920s, and it starts out he has this beautiful home in New Jersey, but as soon as the stock market crash happens, he lost everything. Him and his family had to live in a single-room apartment. They heated it with a small wood-burning stove. Like, just a lot of Americans were down and out. And across the country, because, again, there was kind of a hate. Go ahead.
I'm not even going to answer the Cinderella Man question. You already know that. And, like, again, so much of this is just echoing of, like, today. Like, I don't know how many people are losing their houses, but I know they can't pay rent. I know they can't do a lot of that shit.
And across the country, like the photo I just put up, you had a lot of people waiting in bread lines. Like, this was a common occurrence. Like, so many people would just be in line looking for handouts, and I don't say that in a negative way. A lot of these people couldn't afford to feed their kids. And then because people are losing their homes, you get these makeshift communities built up in parks. They were called Hoovervilles. They were just, made out of plywood, whatever people could find. And they became communities in the centers of towns. Like, there was one in this is a picture from Central Park in New York. Here's one from Seattle, Washington.
I got to stop you, Dan. Again, echoes of today. I was down in Texas earlier this year, and in Austin, there is like a tent city down there. Like, this is still happening today. That's wild.
Yeah, man. So again, they called these Hoovervilles for just there's a national disdain for the presidents.
I don't believe it. Not American people.
These sprang up all over the country. The populated with people made homeless by, the Depression. Others took to traveling, searching for work they could find it. Through transient homelessness had been around since the beginning of the United States. The increase in wandering homeless men was significant during the Depression. Those wandering city to city and town to town weren't the only transients in the United States, because in 1930, to make matters worse, because, usually when stuff is bad, it gets a lot worse. Due to drought and poor soil conditions, massive erosion of land occurred throughout the Midwest. Have you heard of the Dust Bowl?
Yes, I have.
So high winds propelled the dirt and dust to blacken out the sun. It created large drifts of soil across the plains, most popularly known as the Dust Bowl. The harsh climate condition made farming from the Dakotas to Texas virtually impossible. So not only were being hit with economic depression, but farmers couldn't farm. So many people from these regions, including Oklahoma, Nebraska, Texas, moved predominantly towards California in the hope of working on the bountiful farms rumored to be there. These transients became collectively known as Okies and were immortalized in the novel The Grapes of Wrath by John Steinbeck. But of course...
Can I stop you for a second, Dan?
Yep.
So you said the sun was blacked out.
Yeah, it was just impossible to farm.
So we need to take a moment and just acknowledge this. Like, this sounds horrifying.
Yeah, man.
Like sandstorms? You're telling me sandstorms where you can't even see the sun?
I've been in those, but not in the United States.
Now, what does it feel like to be in one of those?
Oh man, it hurts. I remember one time in Iraq, it was like orange, and you could just see the sand coming for like 2 miles away. And when it hit, man, I had sand like in my eyelids. Like I had to go into the bathroom, pull down the bottom of my eyelids, and just take a Q-tip and get everything out because there's no eye wash stations in fucking Iraq, and it just so much wind. It's hard to breathe. It's hard to see. It's just it hurts. It sucks. It looks cool from the outside, but
Does it physically, like when the sand hits you?
What was that?
Does it physically hurt? Like when the sand hits you, does it physically hurt?
Yeah, a couple of them that felt like you're getting sandblasted.
Oh man, that's wild. And how long does it last?
Dude, I've been in one that lasted 10 minutes to the big one I was talking about was about 2 hours.
Good Lord, that's terrifying. Now, are there animals involved in there? Is there any chance you can come into contact with anything you can't see? Is that a danger as well?
Probably. I'm sure they're scared as shit too. But again, you're just kind of focusing on getting back to your room and just getting out of the elements.
Okay, one last question before we get back to this. With the amount of wind that it takes to create a sandstorm, is it physically difficult to move around?
Yeah, man. Again, high winds, just you kind of feel like sand is all that there is. Like that's all that's around there. There's nothing else because you can't see it. It's just, I mean, a high windstorm, and you add little minerals of fucking sand being thrown at you at high speeds.
Wow, thanks for your input on that, Dan. That's very interesting. And I want to say, just for the listeners watching on video, I know my eyes look beady, so I'm trying to give you guys a good eyeball check to let you know I'm alive every now and then.
So one of the big factors that just kind of made the Great Depression worse was that the culture of the United States within the halls of the government was averse to providing aid or welfare to its citizens. Herbert Hoover embodied this attitude because he was born to modest means and worked his way up in local and then national government. Hoover was kind of like a celebrity. He was known as a businessman. He served in World War I. He did a lot of good stuff over in Europe. So he was kind of a celebrity, well-to-do businessman. People knew who he was, and he took this platform as, we're going to have 2 chickens in every pot, a car in every garage. We're just going to make money. It's going to be awesome. Cocaine and hookers. And then the American people are like,
2 things, man.
Woo! Yes.
2 things. Excuse me. Since he served in the army and whatnot, does he seem like a different version of Trump? Would you say you could equate that to him since he was a mini celebrity?
Basically,
okay. And from what I understand about the two chickens in a pot saying that was actually a misquote, and there was like a radio program or a news outlet that just took that and ran with it, and it wasn't actually the direct quote of his.
Wow, way to shit on everything I just said, Johnny. Thank you.
No, but that was the sentiment, though. We're going to end poverty, food in every pot. That was definitely the sentiment. It just wasn't a direct quote.
So just for the viewers at home, to let you know how I'm doing right now, I got a kitty at my feet. The same kitty.
Got turtles behind my back.
The same kitty that scared the shit out of Johnny in episode 6, The Mad Trapper of Rat River. Go check that out.
Yeah, man. No. For the people listening. So we're recording in person that episode, The Mad Trapper, which I say go back and listen to it. Still one of my favorite episodes.
Oh, absolutely.
We're sitting in his kitchen. He's got this emotional dog. When I say that, I mean the dog like it needs Dan. It loves Dan. If Dan had tits, he'd be suckling. It's a great dog, though. But either way, the dog's running loose. It's there. Dan says absolutely nothing about a 20-pound cat that's just lingering in the house. And it just jumps up. And I'm like, wow, what the fuck? I didn't think there was a tiger in here.
There's the dog right there.
Oh, he looks so cute laying on the couch. He's like, are you done recording yet, Dad?
Pass the fuck out. I don't know. I'm kind of worried that the microphone is picking up on a snoring, but hey, whatever. It's adorable.
Actually, no, we don't hear anything. It's not coming through.
Perfect. So Herbert, I'm not saying he's a bad guy. He's just had this old mindset of, kind of like it is today. If you're on welfare, if you don't have a job, you're piggybacking off the system. And
I think the nicest way to put it was that he just lacked empathy.
Yes.
He didn't quite fully understand why people would need help.
So like he believed, like many other politicians of this time, that it was his duty to be a good steward of the nation's finances. To that end, he thought it was negligent, almost immoral, to have a deficit in the national economy.
Sidetrack again, Dan. I got a question for you.
Yeah.
So he believed it was his responsibility. Then what is and maybe this is showing my ignorance, what is the role of the U.S. Treasurer?
Oh, man. No, like he felt like it was his duty to not allow Congress and stuff to pass bills that would add to the national deficit. So like in his mind, it was better to endure some short-term hardship than saddle the nation with a greater problem. And there's a cat right in front of my webcam. Don't do that. Unfortunately, the suffering wasn't short-term. Hoover wanted to help, but it was from an outdated perspective. His administration thought the best strategies was to ensure that the nation didn't fall into debt. In order to stave off the possible shortfalls from decreased revenues, he proposed a tax increase in 1931. But though Hoover's Republican Party controlled Congress, they voted against such a strategy. So everybody
Dan.
wants to go ahead.
He proposed this tax. Obviously, nobody likes taxes. Now, do you think if he would have took on some national debt, we could have avoided the stock market crash?
We couldn't have avoided that, but we could have avoided 10 years of a Great Depression, I think. Just like, because they're just like, all these banks were closing, people are out of jobs, but the government wasn't giving the people money, because you need money to stimulate the economy, and there's no money going to the economy, then the economy falls flat. So they essentially did nothing, and just everything just got worse and worse and worse. And these 4 years, it's going to take several more to get it back because of all the damage that had been done. Did that answer your question?
It definitely did. It cleared it up.
Okay. So we're going to talk about something else that basically broke the straw on the camel's back in terms of the hatred of Herbert Hoover. And this event basically made a re-election impossible. So in 1924, well before the economy fell, Congress had passed a bill to pay World War I veterans bonuses for their service to the nation. And as circumstances became dire, it was proposed in 1932 by Congress to make the payments sooner rather than later, as was originally proposed. In order to show the support for legislation, an estimated 43,000 veterans and their families arrived in Washington. Ultimately, the bill did not pass, but the veterans stayed on in the Capitol, remaining in the camp they had established in the area of Washington called the Anacostia Flats. And just kind of get you an idea of how large this was, this is them protesting to pass this bonus army legislation. It was estimated 43,000 people were there, but it was estimated about 20 to 25,000 veterans came. The rest were their families and stuff like that. So, could you imagine nowadays that they're like, hey, Iraqi and Afghani veterans, we're going to give you about $4,000. You know what? No, we're not. Nope. Oh, hey, we're going to send the cops in too.
Yeah, I could see them doing that to all the American people. Hey, we'll give you $2,000. You know what? No, we're not.
So after the city police failed to disperse the bonus army, Hoover decided to send in the U.S. Army. Under the command of a guy we talk about a lot, but we haven't done an actual episode on, Douglas MacArthur, along with Dwight Eisenhower and his staff, and George Patton. Kind of star-studded team here. They commanded a cavalry regiment. The army charged the bonusers using fixed bayonets and tear gas. Well, there were no deaths from
I am a big fan.
Go ahead.
I'm a big fan of Dwight Eisenhower. I'm sure until we do a dive on him, and then I'll probably hate him for something.
I honestly haven't heard anything negative about him. 55 veterans were injured and 135 were arrested. The bonus army was a black eye for the Hoover administration, and it, along with its ineffectual response to the Depression, damaged his bid for re-election. So the fall of 1932 approached with the first presidential election during the worst economic crisis in the United States. The election day was November 8th, 1932. Chances for re-election were slim. The Republican incumbent, Herbert Hoover, was the representative of the Grand Old Party. His challenger was from a prominent New York family, cousin to former President Theodore Roosevelt, Franklin Delano Roosevelt.
Okay. This is where, not the election part, but like the financial part of the country into play. This week on Shop Talk, what's his name?
Dave Specht. He's a good friend of mine and a good friend of Tripp's, and his economics and finances are his life. So he's going to give us some great. Go ahead.
Shout out to Dave. If you're listening, we're friends on Facebook. Great dude, all that jazz. But what I'm getting at is money is supposed to be backed by gold, if I'm correct. And I don't know if that's what the deal is now, but we also print money. So in that time, couldn't we have just printed money for people? Like, I don't understand everything, how it all falls together. It just seems like none of this makes sense. It's like, hey, we can make some capital to give to people to spend. And yeah, it might fuck up things for a little bit, but it can't mess it up worse than it is now. I don't know. This is something I'm going to ask you to touch upon then, Dave.
Yeah, financial stuff confuses me too. And that's something I've actually planned on asking them. Like, why couldn't they just print it out millions and millions of dollars? But FDR was Harvard educated. He's a former Secretary of the Navy, former governor of New York, and Roosevelt was an unlikely representative of the more populist Democratic Party. Because again, parties back during this time completely different than they are now. Though the Republican Party was united behind Hoover, the Democratic Party was far more divided. The progressive urban wing of the party, which FDR represented, the less progressive remains of a machine-style politics, and Southern segregationists all had influence under the Democratic banner. Uniting those different voices, as well as defeating Hoover in the general election, was the task confronting Roosevelt. Roosevelt and the Democrats were up to the task. In the popular vote, Roosevelt won 57% of the vote to Hoover's 39%. The margin in electoral college was far more telling. Roosevelt received 472 electoral votes to Hoover's 59. In both houses of Congress, the Democrats won solid majorities, gaining close to 100 seats in the House and 12 seats in the Senate. This is significant because now we're going to talk about Roosevelt comes out swinging in his first 100 days. And like you mentioned in the beginning, those first 100 days are basically the gold standard for what all presidents have to face. And if he didn't have a Democratic-led majority, then a lot of those policies probably wouldn't have been passed.
Okay. Before we go on, I have questions because this is relevant to, like, we're going through an election cycle right now.
Right.
And government confuses me so goddamn much. Like, all that stuff you said, I get the gist of it, but I don't fully comprehend all of it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I want to ask you about the events of today. From what I understand, there's some type of election going on in Georgia.
Yeah.
And somebody was telling me something about people of the Electoral College potentially not voting or something crazy. Can you break that down real quick? Just
what do you mean, like the Electoral College and stuff? That's
well, what the hell is Georgia voting on today? What the hell is Georgia voting on today?
I'm not 100%, but it's basically whether or not the election was fraudulent. That's why you're seeing all this stuff like Trump's looking for 11,000 votes. Like, that's what he needs. So that's what's
so
going
you can
on.
Tell me they said, hey, the election's fraudulent. To determine if it was, let's have another election.
Essentially, yeah. So,
okay. I'm sorry I opened that can of worms.
So FDR was elected president. This is where we're going to stop part one, because the FDR presidency was very influential, not only on America during the Great Depression, but we will talk about a lot of programs that are still in place. So this is the end of part one. I hope you guys enjoyed it. I hope it wasn't just a bunch of boring information. Johnny, I hope you enjoyed it as well. But in part two, we're going to talk about the New Deal, which was the platform that FDR ran on. And as we're going to see, the New Deal is just all these plans and policies to, create work, create money, kind of stimulate the economy and get us back on our feet. We're going to learn about that and more on part two of episode 21. I'm Dan Brady.
I'm Johnny Smith.
And till next time, folks.
Peace and